are a meathead. A meathead, dead from the neck up. Meathead.
Carroll O'Connor never forgave Rob Reiner. Now we know the reason why. Long before anyone in the audience caught on, Carroll O'Connor wasn't merely part of television's biggest phenomenon. He was the gravitational force holding it together. Every room bent around him. Every scene revolved around his presence. But behind the thunderous applause and the laughter that echoed through living rooms across America, O'Connor carried something dark and unresolved. This wasn't a petty feud. This wasn't an ego bruise that healed with time. It was a wound that never closed. For years, decades even, the public never noticed. He never said the name again, never addressed it, never corrected the record. And when his story finally came to an end, that silence said more than any interview ever could. So what really happened behind the cameras? Who was the one person Carroll O'Connor could not forgive, no matter how much time passed? The answer is unsettling enough to make those famous words land differently. You are a meathead. A meathead. They sounded like punchlines, but they were rooted in something painfully real. Because before the fracture, before the cold distance and the unspoken bitterness, there was something electric. At the dawn of the 1970s, a bold, controversial sitcom detonated onto American television and rewrote the rules overnight. All in the Family didn't just entertain, it provoked, challenged, and divided the nation. At its center stood Carroll O'Connor, transforming Archie Bunker into one of the most unforgettable characters in TV history. From the very first episode, viewers were locked in. Archie was loud, stubborn, deeply flawed, and impossibly human. Standing opposite him was a younger foil, sharp-tongued and fearless, pushing back at every turn. Their exchanges didn't just get laughs, they sparked. Every argument crackled, every insult landed, every uneasy pause felt alive. On screen, the chemistry felt effortless. Off screen, it was anything but. To the public, everything appeared smooth. Smiles at press events, polite praise in interviews, no scandals, no blow-ups. But those who worked behind the scenes would later whisper about an invisible tension, something you could feel even when nothing was said. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic walk-offs, no explosive confrontations for the tabloids to feast on. Instead, it simmered, quiet, persistent, unresolved. Some say it began during rehearsals, when creative control became a battleground. Others believe it was inevitable from the start. Two men from entirely different worlds, forced into an intense partnership under the glare of national fame. On one side stood a seasoned actor, classically trained, disciplined, and hardened by decades of hard-earned respect. On the other was a rising star, young, confident, outspoken, and armed with a razor-sharp intellect. As All in the Family soared from hit to cultural earthquake, the distance didn't shrink, it expanded. And with every season, every accolade, every roar of applause, the resentment grew quieter and deeper. What audiences never saw was that All in the Family was built on a quiet collision long before it became a cultural force. From day one, their approaches clashed, their ambitions rarely met in the middle, and their visions for the show pulled in opposite directions. Professionalism kept the wheels turning, but the tension never truly left the room. What looked like harmless creative debates slowly, almost imperceptibly, hardened into something far more personal. To the outside world, everything still looked flawless, smooth, confident, unstoppable. Week after week, the show delivered laughs, fueled national conversations, and crushed ratings without breaking a sweat. But behind the applause was a set charged with strong personalities, relentless standards, and two leading men who almost never saw eye to eye, no matter how seamless their chemistry appeared on screen. At the center of it all stood Carroll O'Connor, a man known for precision that bordered on obsession. To him, storytelling was sacred, timing was non-negotiable. Characters weren't just roles, they were responsibilities. Nothing in his process was accidental. Silence mattered as much as dialogue, and pauses were deliberate, not decorative. He didn't simply learn his lines, he dismantled them, rebuilt them, and shaped them until they felt honest. Writers respected his dedication, even when they knew he would push back on anything that felt false. Across from him, however, was a younger co-star, Rob Reiner, overflowing with momentum and sharp wit, injecting a different energy into the room. That energy was looser, louder, and far more outspoken about where the show should be headed. While Carol fought to protect the character-first foundation that defined the series, Rob grew increasingly interested in turning the platform into something bolder and more message-driven. Ideas poured freely, but many of them collided head-on with Carol's understanding of what All in the Family was meant to be. One crew member later recalled a quiet but telling moment. Carol politely suggested a rewrite to soften a scene that felt too broad, too preachy. Rob refused. No raised voices, no dramatic walk-off, just a firm, immovable line drawn in the sand. When the episode aired, attentive viewers noticed something subtle. The balance had shifted, leaning closer to the younger actor's sensibility than Carol's. To most people it seemed trivial, hardly worth a second thought, but to Carol it felt like a warning sign. Those nearby said the tension didn't explode overnight, it crept in slowly. Side comments during table reads, small disputes over phrasing, debates over punchlines that never quite ended. Until one thing became impossible to ignore. Carol no longer felt challenged creatively, he felt overruled. And worse, he began to believe Rob Reiner wasn't just shaping episodes, but quietly redefining the soul of the show itself. From the outside, All in the Family looked like a flawless machine, but behind the cameras, tension was quietly boiling over. So much so that Carol O'Connor once hinted he might walk away from the show entirely. He never named names, yet everyone whispered they knew exactly who had pushed him to the edge. Meanwhile, cast members like Gene Stapleton and Sally Struthers became the unofficial diplomats, trying to calm storms that seemed impossible to quiet. Even their best efforts often fell short. For Carol, every scene carried real emotional weight. When Rob improvised or loosened the carefully structured rhythm of a live taping, it didn't feel like playful spontaneity, it felt like sabotage. A performer who built each beat with precision couldn't ignore disruption. And yet, on camera, the cracks were invisible. The audience saw only polished performances, unaware that some scenes were filmed hours after heated clashes. Still, the strain festered. Carol retreated further into himself. Rob Reiner became more outspoken, and though no doors were slammed and no arguments erupted publicly, the dynamic had shifted permanently. Then came the moment that changed everything. A single interview, intended to celebrate the show's legacy, became a quiet battlefield. Asked to reflect on the impact of their characters, Rob's tone shifted. Archie Bunker, he said, wasn't just flawed, he was dangerous, a figure not to be respected or empathized with. To most, it sounded like harmless analysis, but to Carol, it was betrayal. Archie wasn't just a role, he was a character painstakingly crafted, complex, and human. Carol had never portrayed him as a hero, but he refused to reduce him to a monster. That handful of words cut deeper than any argument ever could, and the rift between them would never fully heal. Archie Bunker was never meant to be a villain. He was supposed to hold up a mirror to America. But when a co-star described him in scathing, almost brutal terms, it wasn't just criticism, it felt like a betrayal that cut to the bone. And it didn't stay behind closed doors. Newspapers splashed the remarks, TV anchors repeated them, and suddenly the private tension became a national story. Headlines hinted at a scandal simmering just out of view. Carol O'Connor never lashed out publicly, but inside, a storm raged. Those closest to him say he felt blindsided. The very co-star who had risen alongside him, thriving off Archie's sharp complexity, had dismissed years of shared work with a single sentence. Worse, Carol believed those words twisted the character he had helped build into something toxic, blurring the line between actor and role in a way that felt deeply personal. Soft whispers began to circulate. Had Carol secretly agreed with Archie's controversial opinions? He denied it again and again, but the damage lingered, a silent weight he carried alone. Even in later interviews, when the topic approached, his voice shifted, subtle, restrained, unmistakable. He stopped mentioning Rob Reiner entirely, a quiet refusal to reopen old wounds. During reunions and retrospectives, the absence was telling. Carol praised scene writers, producers, guest stars, anyone, but that one name was always missing, a ghost in the room. Fame had touched both men, but for Carol, the cost was a fractured bond that no spotlight could repair. When the final scene wrapped, the silence between them was deafening. As All in the Family came to an end, millions of fans laughed, debated, and grew with the bunkers. Yet behind the applause, Carol O'Connor and Rob Reiner walked away in opposite directions, professionally celebrated, personally estranged, leaving a rift that lingered long after the cameras went dark. Carol's life was inseparable from Archie Bunker, the character that both defined and haunted him. Even as Archie Bunker's place took over the airwaves, his devotion never wavered. While the world around him raced forward, Carol clung to stories raw, uncomfortable, and unflinching. Fame? That was never the goal. Impact? That was the pursuit. And though he later appeared in shows like The Heat of the Night, the shadow of Archie lingered over every scene, every line, every glance. But while Carol carried Archie with him, his former co-star Rob Reiner vanished in an unexpected pivot. Almost overnight, he abandoned acting and threw himself into directing with relentless obsession. Soon he became one of the era's most celebrated filmmakers, crafting hits that echoed across generations. Critics hailed his vision, audiences celebrated his genius. Yet Carol's name barely appeared. The man who had stood beside him, scene after scene, was quietly erased from the narrative. Carol noticed. It cut deep, far deeper than he could ever say aloud. At award shows honoring All in the Family, Carol praised Gene Stapleton, Norman Lear, and other collaborators, but never once mentioned Rob Reiner. Not by accident, not by oversight, deliberate. When journalists pressed, Carol deflected with grace. No yelling, no attacks, just a quiet, unmistakable message. There would be no reconciliation, no shared memories, no warmth left to salvage. Behind the scenes, speculation grew. Some blamed pride, others pointed to clashing values, but those closest to Carol knew the truth ran deeper. The sting of having helped someone climb only to be forgotten at the summit. Over time, the silence itself became the story. Two men who once shared the spotlight, shaping one of television's most influential shows, now existed as strangers. Yet Carol would not remain silent forever. When the moment finally arrived, he spoke his truth, and the revelation stunned audiences. Decades passed, television evolved, audiences changed, and the legacy of All in the Family became immortal. But for Carol, the shadow of Archie and the betrayal of a former friend remained an indelible part of that story. Some wounds never truly heal, and for Carol O'Connor, one in particular festered quietly for decades. He rarely spoke of the past unless pressed, and when he did, every word was deliberate, measured. Yet, even in silence, one absence screamed louder than anything else. During a 1990 televised interview, Carol was asked if he missed his former cast. The camera caught a subtle shift in his expression, just enough to make viewers lean in. He offered a soft, almost wistful smile. "Some of them, yes," he said. But when the topic turned to the on-screen son-in-law, the one who had shared countless pivotal scenes with him, Carol paused, carefully weighing his words. "The boy did a good job," he finally said. That was it. No name, no warmth. Just the boy. Casual viewers might have shrugged, but anyone who knew Carol understood the weight of that silence. Carol never forgot names or faces. Every omission was intentional. It was his quiet way of saying, "I will not go there." Behind closed doors, friends revealed the truth. Carol still felt deeply betrayed, not by scandal or criticism, but by something far more personal. He believed Rob had used All in the Family as a springboard, only to undercut the show's heart and its leading man in the process. He had been erased in the smallest but most painful way. Decades of building one of television's most iconic duos seemed undone. Even at late-night appearances or industry galas, Carol remained composed. If the name came up, he would nod, smile faintly, and redirect. Off-camera, he once confided to a colleague, "There's nothing left to say that I haven't already chosen to withhold. It's not spite, it's a boundary, one I never cross." Co-workers later confirmed what fans had long suspected. Carol never truly forgave what he saw as a rewriting of their shared legacy. It wasn't ego, it wasn't bitterness, it was loyalty. Loyalty to a show, a character, a story he had poured himself completely. And watching someone walk away while diminishing that contribution, it cut deeper than most could imagine. For Carol, this was never just about work. It was about gratitude, respect, and the painful truth. He had been left behind. Even in his final public appearances, Carol O'Connor held a calm that was almost uncanny. The full story of his life remained hidden, tucked behind measured words and intentional pauses. He let silence do the talking, leaving the audience to piece together the unspoken truths. When his life finally came to an end, that silence became permanent. Carol's last years were a portrait of quiet strength, grace, and reflective introspection. Behind the stoic exterior lay profound personal heartbreak, the devastating loss of his son, compounded by lingering health struggles that gradually drew him out of the spotlight. Yet through every trial, he remained a beacon of inspiration for the millions who had grown up with his work. When news of his death spread in June 2001, a wave of grief and admiration swept across the entertainment world. Tributes poured in from actors, directors, and producers alike. Norman Lear, Gene Stapleton, and countless others recounted stories of the man who had given life to Archie Bunker. But one voice stood conspicuously silent. Carol's most famous co-star, Rob Reiner, offered no public acknowledgement. Days passed, then weeks, with still no statement, no appearance, no tribute. For fans, the silence was deafening. Some saw it as private mourning. Others sensed a message more complicated, more bitter. To many, it confirmed what rumors had long suggested. The rift between the two had never truly healed, neither in life nor in death. Carol's funeral was intimate yet profoundly moving, attended by family, close friends, and television legends. Everyone who had worked with him spoke of his kindness, professionalism, and loyalty, but eyes inevitably drifted to the empty seat where his former co-star Rob might have been. Some hoped for a last-minute reconciliation, a nod to shared history, but it never came. In the years that followed, documentaries and retrospectives revisited All in the Family, analyzing its cultural impact, the fearless storytelling, and the legendary chemistry between the cast. Carol's influence was celebrated, his dedication honored, but that one pivotal voice remained apart. Even in later interviews, Rob spoke in vague generalities, never naming Carol, never giving the tribute millions of fans had quietly waited for. It wasn't anger that gripped him, nor bitterness. It was a hollow emptiness that lingered, quietly shaping everything. That invisible distance left viewers unsettled, sensing a story half told. It was as if the years they had shared were carefully packed away, tucked out of the narrative he wanted to leave behind. Those memories no longer belonged to the chapters he chose to share. Fans noticed. Comments poured in, buzzing with questions. Why the silence? Why the coldness? No one ever got a clear answer, but the truth felt simpler than anyone expected. Whatever tension existed between Carol O'Connor and Rob Reiner never found resolution. This wasn't a scandal screaming for headlines, nor a public clash. It ran deeper, a subtle fracture that refused to heal. Some whispered that Carol quietly waited for an apology that never came. Others say he eventually made peace with the silence and moved forward. Yet one fact remained undeniable. When the final curtain fell, there was no reunion, no heartfelt farewell, only the lingering echo of a friendship long faded. And oddly, that very silence spoke louder than words ever could. Carroll O'Connor left the world not just with a legacy, but with a character that refused to be forgotten. Archie Bunker wasn't merely a role, he became a cultural lightning rod, a mirror reflecting society's truths, and a vessel for Carroll's subtle vulnerability, sharp wit, and unflinching honesty. Millions laughed, argued, and recognized themselves in him, whether they wanted to or not. Carroll O'Connor was more than just Archie Bunker. Behind the laughter and the sharp wit was a deeply thoughtful artist, a devoted father, and a man for whom loyalty wasn't just a word, it was a way of life. So when the rift with Rob Reiner happened, it cut deeper than anyone could imagine. Not just for him, but for anyone who had ever believed in the magic they created together on screen. Their chemistry wasn't written, it was alive, spontaneous, perfect in timing, a kind of brilliance that could never be faked. And that brilliance made the aftermath almost unbearable. There were no public fights, no screaming headlines, no scandals, only absence. Two men who had shared stages, jokes, and decades of history now existed in complete silence. Not a word of warmth, not a flicker of fondness, not a single acknowledgement. It was as if one had been erased from the story entirely. Maybe that's what makes it so tragic. All in the Family wasn't just a TV show. It was about connection, about people reaching for one another, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing. In real life, that bridge was never crossed. Carroll never spoke his former co-star Rob Reiner's name, not in interviews, not in speeches, not in casual conversation. He let silence carry the weight, a quiet that spoke louder than any headline ever could, preserving his dignity in the process. Perhaps he knew some chapters are better left unfinished, some betrayals better left unspoken. The one person Carroll O'Connor never forgave was someone who had once shared the spotlight, someone entwined in the making of television history. And when the final curtain fell, there was no handshake, no closure, no goodbye, only distance and an echoing quiet. Sometimes the most haunting stories aren't the ones told, they're the ones lingering in the space between words, in the silences that make us imagine what could have been.